In 1932, a couple poisoned themselves on a hillside outside Tokyo. That night, someone dug up the woman's grave and stole her body. Then, the suicide started. By 1935, nearly 200 people had copied the exact same death at the exact same hill. On the morning of May 9th, 1932, two bodies were found in a wooded area near the top of a hill outside the coastal town of Oiso in the Shonan region of Kanagawa Prefecture. A man in his mid-20s wearing a Keio University uniform and cap. A woman, early 20s, dressed like someone from a wealthy family. They were lying side by side, facing the sea. A bowl of nameless white flowers had been placed beside their heads. Both had died from poisoned water, mercury chloride dissolved in liquid, a substance that kills you slowly from the inside. When the reporter filed the story, he couldn't find the hill on any official map, so he named it himself, Sakatayama, Mount Sakata. The name didn't exist before, he wrote it down. It does exist now. 2 days later, the evening papers revealed who they were. The man was Chosho Goro. The woman was Yuyama Yaiko. They had met through a Christian fellowship, both members of the Anglican Church in Japan. Goro's father had given his words. Once Goro graduated from Keio, they would be married, a house would be built. The future was already planned. But Yaiko's parents were wealthy merchants from Shizuoka Prefecture. They refused. They had arranged a different man for their daughter. Yaiko's own sister had also died under unusual circumstances. And rather than marry a stranger, rather than spend her life with someone chosen for her by people who did not ask, Yaiko climbed a hill with Goro and lay down beside him and did not come back. Their suicide note was dated May 5th, 4 days before they were found dead. But 3 days after the story broke, something happened that nobody could explain. A young couple, strangers unconnected to Goro and Yaiko, stepped in front of a train on the Chu main line outside of city of Kofu. When police searched the bodies, they found a photograph. It was the photograph from the newspaper, the one of Goro and Yaiko. They had never met them, they just saw the picture and they went to die carrying it. That was May 13th, 4 days after the first bodies were found. The story was only just beginning. By December 1932, 20 couples had traveled to the same hill outside Oiso and died there by the same method. The location didn't exist on any map. The name had been invented by a journalist, and people were making pilgrimages to it to die. Within a month of the original incident, Count Katsu Kobashi, the adopted son of Katsu Kaishu, one of the most celebrated statesmen in Japanese history and the 10th son of the last Tokugawa shogun, Yoshinobu, committed suicide along his mistress. The story had reached into the highest levels of Japanese aristocracy. By 1935, the total count of suicides and attempted suicides connected to the Sakatayama case had reached approximately 200. To understand how this spread the way it did, you have to understand what the press did to the story. The initial coverage was already everywhere, but on November 11, 6 months after the bodies were found, the Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun published something that changed everything. A photograph taken by Goro and Yaiko themselves, using a self-timer, before they climbed down and drank the poison. Two people alive together on a hill they had chosen to die on. It was the last image they left of themselves. The paper ran it nationwide. The nation was transfixed. But then the story got worse. The night after Yaiko was buried, someone dug up her grave. Her body was taken from the ground and stripped of all its funeral clothing. When police found her, she had been reburied in the sand of Oiso Beach. A headline in the Tokyo Asahi described it, "Not a stitch of clothing on, discovered at Oiso Beach. Who buried her in the sand?" The body snatcher turned out to be a 65-year-old crematorium employee. He later said his confession was coerced, that the newspaper had printed a story that wasn't true. But it didn't matter, because during the investigation, the police doctor who performed the autopsy made a remark to journalists. He told them that Yaiko was a virgin. The Tokyo Nichi-Nichi Shimbun ran this at its front page headline: "The fragrance of purity is high, and love tied to heaven." That was the moment the story became something different. Not a tragedy, a myth. Two people who had chosen each other in a world that wouldn't allow it, who had died as they had lived, pure together, untouched. The idea spread to Japan like something igniting. Within 4 days of the headline, the first film studio announced it would dramatize the incident. They had cameras on set within a week. The film was called Love Tied to Heaven, Tengoku ni Musubukoi. It was released on June 10, 1932. 1 month after Goro and Yaiko were found, rushed into production while the country was still in shock. It became one of the biggest box office hits of the year. And then something happened inside the cinemas that nobody had anticipated. People started bringing poison with them to the screenings. The same mercury chloride that Goro and Yaiko had used, bought in small containers, hidden in clothing, taken out in the dark while the film played. Theater owners began finding audience members losing consciousness mid-screening. People were stationed in the aisles to walk the rows during the film to watch for anyone who appeared to be dying. Think about what that means. People were going to the cinema, watching a romantic dramatization of a double suicide, and choosing that moment surrounded by strangers in the dark with the film still running to end their lives. The story had become the method. The medium had become the mechanism. Outside the cinemas, an entire economy had grown around their deaths. Radio dramas, stage plays, best-selling records of the film's theme song. And in the town of Oiso itself, where the bodies had been found, local residents were selling merchandise. In 1950, 18 years later, a newspaper reporter who had been with the doctor during the original autopsy made a quiet admission. He said the doctor had actually suggested on the way down the mountain that the virgin story might not have been accurate. 18 years. By 1950, approximately 200 people had already died, carrying a myth that may have been invented on a mountain path by a police doctor making an offhand remark to a journalist. The story had spread further and faster than anyone involved had stopped to consider, and no one had tried to stop it, because stopping it wasn't profitable. Stopping it wasn't interesting. The deaths were the content. The Sakatayama case was not the beginning of this pattern, and it was not the end. The first documented instance in modern Japan happened in 1903, nearly 30 years earlier, at Kigon Falls in Nikko. A 16-year-old philosophy student named Misao Fujimura traveled alone to Kigon Falls in Nikko, carved a farewell poem into a trunk of a tree, and jumped 100 meters to his death. The poem was reprinted in the newspapers nationwide. It was poetic, philosophical. It made him sound not like someone who had broken down, but like someone who had arrived at an answer. The press called him Japan's Hamlet. Postcards of his face were sold as mementos. By the end of 1903, 16 people had died at Kigon Falls by imitation. By the following year, the number had climbed to over 100. Each death was the same. Young, often a student, same location, same logic. Then came the 1932 Sakatayama case. Then, in January 1933, the first death at Mount Mihara, the epidemic covered in my last video, where 944 people died in a single year and over 2,000 by the end of the decade. Many historians believe that the Sakatayama media coverage directly influenced what happened at Mount Mihara. The romantic language used to describe Goro and Yaiko, love that transcends death, souls that reach heaven, was the same vocabulary the press used to describe the volcano jumpers in 1933. So, why did this keep happening? Why this decade? Why Japan? There is a clinical name for what was occurring, the Werther effect, named after Goethe's novel The Sorrows of Young Werther, in which a lovesick young man shoots himself after being rejected. The book spread across Europe and young men started dying. Same method, same outfit as the character. Copies of the novel found beside the bodies. Several countries banned it, but it didn't stop. The research since then has only confirmed what happened. When the press romanticizes a suicide, covers the method, makes it beautiful, the numbers go up. The coverage is the contagion. The story is the infection. But the Werther effect needs the right conditions to run out of control. In 1930s Japan had all of them. The country was in economic freefall. Farmers were being evicted. Factory workers were losing their jobs en masse. Entire rural communities were collapsing. At the same time, the military was taking over the government. Japan had invaded Manchuria in 1931. By 1932, dissent was punishable by arrest and torture. And inside that pressure cooker, certain things were simply impossible. A Keio University student could not marry the woman he loved if her parents refused. A young woman with a forbidden sexuality could not exist openly. A student who rejected nationalism risked imprisonment. The system that blocked people were total. There were no therapy, no public language for suffering, no framework that said your pain was real and worth addressing. What there was a press with no ethical guidelines around suicide coverage. The same newspapers being censored on politics were free to print farewell notes in full, publish photographs of the dead, and turn death locations into tourist attractions. And for young people with no other way to be heard, a beautiful public death offered something almost unbearable: an audience. The press handed them a script, and they used it. There's a concept in Japanese folklore that I think maps onto all of these better than any Western framework: onryo. It translates roughly as vengeful spirit, but that translation loses something. An onryo is not simply a ghost. It is a soul that died in a state of such extreme emotion, jealousy, grief, rage, injustice, that it cannot pass on. The intensity of what is felt at the moment of death becomes a kind of permanent contamination. And that contamination spreads. An onryo's curse is not like a Western haunting, where a spirit is stuck in one place. Onryo's curse is transmissible. In the folklore, if you encounter the cursed space, if you touch the object, enter the room, watch the footage, the curse moves to you. You become a vector. The death jumps from person to person like a pathogen. This is almost exactly the premise of Ring. In Koichi Suzuki's novel, Sadako Yamamura is a young woman who dies wronged, thrown into a well, sealed alive, dying in a state of total injustice and fury. Her curse doesn't stay in the well, it transfers into a videotape. Anyone who watches the tape acquires the curse. 7 days later they die, and the mechanism of transmission is media, a recording, a copy, a broadcast. Suzuki didn't invent this metaphor. He found it in history. Yaiko Yuyama died wronged. She was a woman blocked by her own family from the life she had chosen, handed to a stranger against her will, given no recourse. She climbed a hill with the person she loved, and they drank poison together and died. Then her photograph was published. Then her suicide note circulated. Then a film was made. And then people who encountered that image, that note, that film, died in imitation. The death traveled through media. It moved from person to person. It killed. Kyoko Matsumoto died wronged, a young woman in a forbidden relationship, abandoned by a society that called her love a disease. Her farewell note was reprinted in the newspapers across Japan, and then hundreds of people followed her into the same volcano. The structure of an onryo curse is not a metaphor. It is a clinical description of what actually happened. A death with sufficient emotional charge, injustice, forbidden love, a soul trapped by a society that wouldn't let it live, became a transmission event. The medium was the press. The incubation period was days or weeks. The symptom was imitation. The traditional Japanese understanding held that an onryo could not be destroyed. It could only be appeased by acknowledging the wrong that was done, by giving the spirit a measure of justice, by building a shrine, by restoring a name. What you could not do was ignore it and expect it to stop. Japan in the 1930s kept creating the conditions for onryo. It kept producing wrongs it refused to acknowledge. Women who couldn't live the lives they chose. Young men who had no language for what they felt. A press that turned their deaths into entertainment rather than examining the structures that produced them. And the deaths kept spreading. The Sakatayama case ended the way all of them ended, not because anyone fixed the conditions that caused it, but because the press moved on to the next thing. In January 1933, 7 months after Goro and Yaiko were found on that hillside, a schoolgirl jumped into Mount Mihara. Many historians believe the Sakatayama coverage was part of what made that happen. The language was the same. Love that inspires the body, heaven is somewhere you reach by leaving. Goro and Yaku's names are not famous now. The hill outside Oiso still doesn't appear on any official map under the name a journalist invented on a deadline. But for 3 years, the story of what happened to them moved through Japan like a contagion. Through newspapers, through film, through music, through the bodies of 200 people who climbed to the same spot and lay down. A death that wouldn't stay dead. If that sounds familiar, it should. If you like this video, hit like. I'm building toward 1,000 subscribers. If you're new here, subscribe. Leave a comment. What do you know about this case? Or what era of Japanese history do you want me to go down next? Comments tell me what's landing and I'll keep making these. If you think this is the kind of thing more people should know about, share it. That's the only algorithm that works. Thanks for watching.